The Aztecs are something like my secret favorite civilization. I'm rarely as happy as when a professional player plays the Aztecs these days. In fact, my first steps on the leaderboard were with the Aztecs. Today, however, like everyone else, I play them at best when I get them as random civilization. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at the Aztecs and try to explain why they are the way they are. In these civilization episodes, I'll try to put the characteristics of the civilizations, their units and unique technologies into a historical context and deduce how the developers were inspired by the real Aztecs. Believe me, researching the Aztecs felt a bit like falling deeper and deeper into madness. So I don't want to delay any longer, and let's just start from the beginning. The Aztecs were a Mesoamerican civilization that flourished in central Mexico during the post-classic period from 1300 to 1521. The Aztec people comprised various ethnic groups of central Mexico, particularly the groups that spoke the Nahuatl language and existed from the 14th to the 16th century. And by the way, I will butcher pretty much everything that's written and spoken in Nahuatl because, of course, I don't speak the language. In Age of Empires 2, as in real life, the Aztecs have a strong focus on infantry and monks. They have a notable economic bonus, but no particular unit worth booming into. Instead, with faster producing eagle warriors, great monks, and good siege weapons, they are well equipped to play aggressively and put early pressure on the enemy. Just like the real Aztecs, they also exuded absolute dominance in our beloved game for a while, only to then abruptly disappear from the scene. Now, I let the cat out of the bag right away and said Mesoamerican. The Aztecs are one of the two Mesoamerican civilizations in the game, the other being the Maya, and we also incorrectly say that the Incas are Mesoamerican because these three civilizations have things in common that they don't share with any other civilization, like their eagle warriors and that they don't have a stable and these kind of things. We should refer to them as Native American civilizations instead, then that would be perfectly fine, but no one will hold it against us if we overlook that little historical inaccuracy, at least while playing the game. I'll save the explanation of why the Incas were not in a Mesoamerican civilization for the episode on the Incas. I'll also address in their respective episodes that both the Maya and the Incas apparently owned horses and knew how to ride them, but for the Aztecs I couldn't find any reliable sources indicating that they actually had any kind of cavalry, which makes their access to the Xolotl warrior somewhat questionable, a unit I'll talk about later on. Speaking of historical inaccuracies, the fact that the Aztecs have such good siege weapons in the game and have both siege rams and siege onagers is somewhat astonishing considering that they apparently never, and this is kind of hard to imagine, they never invented the wheel, not to mention the fact that the Aztecs had no siege weapons at all. So allow me to be a little confused when looking at their tech tree and realizing that the Aztecs, of all people, do have access to siege engineering, but the Turks, for example, don't. I realize that this is purely for balancing reasons, and the Turks really don't need siege engineers, but I wanted to make a note of it. There's also the misconception that the Aztecs had no access to copper or metal, but had gold in abundance, which is kinda true, but not really. It seems to be the case that the Aztecs did not produce many metal goods and above all had basic knowledge of gold smelting, but they usually imported copper products from other people, so they didn't need to produce it. So if you think that the Aztecs should not have had access to swordsmen, I'm sorry to disappoint you. They were more than just glove-carrying thugs. Nonetheless, the Aztecs, they did have a lot of gold. They were swimming in gold, so it honestly feels like a bit of a ripoff when you only have a paltry 50 extra gold pieces at the start of the game. Then again, if you think back to the good old Voobly days, those 50 extra gold allowed the Aztecs to do something very unusual. I'm talking, of course, about the infamous 5 militia drosh, which is about as dead as it gets to be in today's meta. The 5 militia drosh is of course still possible, and I still have fond memories of it, but in times when 19 pop-up is the most common uptime in the feudal age, this opening is really not recommended. The recent update has hardly changed anything about this, especially since not the gold costs but only the food costs have been slightly reduced. What is more realistic is that the Aztecs can seize their initiative thanks to their additional starting gold. This makes it easier for them to play a men-at-arms opening or even afford an extra militia soldier during a drush without having to collect gold. Basically, you can play the classic drush with 3 militiamen like a French drush, which I personally really like with the Aztecs. Now that this has been clarified, let's take a look at the Aztecs' strengths. Their villages can carry +3 resources of any kind. This eco bonus allows them to play very aggressively and get a lot of units on the field quickly without having to go all in like other civilizations do. The bonus increases the efficiency of peasants more than the efficiency of villages on other resources, because peasants are inefficient when they run back and forth between their farms and their drop-off points like mills and TCs. They simply have less running time if they carry the additional 3 resources, and over the course of the game, this actually adds up quite nicely and saves a lot of running time. For the same reason, wheelbarrow and handcart are the eco-technologies that benefit the farming eco the most. And while we're at it, let's put this into numbers because there's something very interesting about how this develops over the course of the game. Spirit of the Law once calculated this and found that the Aztecs' advantage in collecting food from farms with the handcart diminishes in relation to other civilization with handcart, so you don't collect food as much faster with the same tax as you did before the handcart or wheelbarrow kicks in. Nevertheless, an advantage is still an advantage, so I'll take it. On the other hand, it is important to note that due to the increased carrying capacity, in the Dark Age especially, you have to manually drop off food more often than other civilizations in order to constantly produce villager. However, recently I've played a lot of games with the Aztecs for, preparation for this episode, and I realized it's actually not that bad anymore. I felt like it was worse before, but right now, in a couple of games, I just had to manually drop off from time to time. However, I do this very automatically, so I'm not really sure if I just, anticipated correctly and therefore it felt smooth, or if it's actually gotten better. Anyway, where does this eco bonus come from, you may ask, if the Aztecs didn't even invent the wheel? Well, the Aztecs were a civilization marked by numerous wars and violent conflicts. At one point, they conquered several cities around Lake, and please forgive me for mispronouncing this already, Xochimilco and Lake Chalco, I guess, where an extremely fertile method of cultivation was used, the chinampa. Chinampas, sometimes referred to as floating gardens, which is very poetic, are artificial islands created by interweaving reeds with stakes under the surface of the lake, creating underwater fences. These newly created areas under the water that were restricted by these fences were then filled with soil and aquatic vegetation until the top layer of soil was visible on the surface of the water. The construction of chinampas not only involved the filling in of land masses, but also the development of a drainage system that represented a real turning point in agriculture. A ditch was created to allow the flow of water and sediment. Over time, the ditch slowly accumulated silt. This silt then was dug up and placed on the chinampas to remove the blockage. The soil at the bottom of the lake was also rich in nutrients and thus served as an efficient and effective fertilizer for the chinampas. This was ingenious. Harvests, which, if you really think about it, is really nothing. Replenishing the topsoil with the lost nutrients ensured bountiful harvests, which, if you think about it, is really nothing more than having more resources in the hands of the villagers, right? So there you have it. The reasons the Aztecs are carrying more is because they have more to carry due to their good harvests. But how helpful is that for the Aztecs? The Aztecs' unit options and efficient villagers mean that it rarely makes sense to boom much with this civilization. This only happens, if at all, on closed maps and rather in team games when you want to get into siege weapons. And even then, you can argue that Aztecs on closed maps would probably prefer to play a monk-winning rush or monk siege push. The fact that the Aztecs get 33% more gold from relics as a team bonus helps as well. The Aztecs are much more about gold than they are about food. Gold is basically their bread and butter. They need it for monks, for eagle warriors, and for their siege. With their super efficient relics, they even have less incentive to create lots of villagers, I think. In this respect, the eco bonus nerfs itself a little bit at the end of the game. Nevertheless, I think it's very strong, and because it applies universally and not just to one resource, it can also be used flexibly. Well, the Aztecs could harvest many things thanks to their fertile soil and very creative agricultural skills, and they did have gold in abundance, but of course, their life was not as easy as it sounds right now. Firstly, gold was not worth as much to them as it is to us, and secondly, they were not interested in such material possessions. The most important thing for the Aztecs was the inner value of a person. However, when I say inner value, I am not joking. I mean the inside of a person. They tore out the hearts of the prisoners of war to sacrifice them to the gods. They wore the skin of their human sacrifices as leather masks for days on end. Religion was the most important factor in the lives of the Aztecs and their neighbors. In their faith, bloodthirsty gods ruled their world and had to be constantly appeased by sacrifices to prevent them from destroying the world. Imagine living in a world like that, where you're constantly threatened to be destroyed by your own gods. In other words, this must have been the worst cult in all time. And because the gods seemed to be particularly satisfied by human sacrifice, wars were the most efficient way to satisfy the high demand for sacrificial material. For the Aztecs, there were two types of war. One was waged to subjugate neighboring tribes and civilizations and spread Aztec supremacy. The subjugated people then were forced to pay tribute to the Aztecs. As the Aztecs, who were mainly people from a small kind of island in Tenochtitlan, they were unable to grow enough crops to feed their population. Despite extremely costly attempts to expand their chinampas, they lived largely off the tributes of the subjugated tribes. And if there was no neighboring tribes to subjugate, they simply fabricated one for religious purposes. And this is what they called the Flower War, which is called Garland War in the game. Now, flower wars were used to win living prisoners for the sacrificial ritual. It is said that the first flower war was triggered by a great famine. The Aztecs believed that they could appease the gods and end the famine through human sacrifice, so that they could continue to wage flower wars in the distant future. The Aztecs deliberately allowed smaller tribes a certain degree of independence, such as the Mixtecs or Zapotecs in the south of their empire. Whenever it was time to make sacrifices to the gods, these poor people had to step up. It was literally the Hunger Games. The Flower War followed fixed rules and rituals. They were not just barbaric fights. The battles usually began at dawn with smoke signals. These signals were also used to coordinate attacks between different divisions of the army. Attack signals were also given by drums. In the Flower War, the opposing armies only sent one line of fighters at a time against each other. Only the best warriors were allowed to fight at the beginning of one battle. The others patiently waited behind them until it was their turn and watched their friends and family being captured by the enemy. The aim was to take as many living prisoners as possible so they then could be sacrificed later for the gods. Those who took prisoners on the battlefield could also move up in society. Apparently, the battles consisted mainly of many individual fights, as in what we would call honorable fights today. The intervention of a third party in an ongoing duel was absolutely not permitted. Once the fighters had taken enough prisoners, they left the battlefield and carried off their defeated opponents. As both the Aztecs and their opponents require human sacrifices for their, religious rites, the warring parties met regularly for these almost sporting battles, if you will. But these battles could not have been as orderly as this sounds. In 1504, and once again, I'm so sorry, the Tlaxcaltecs, I think, defeated the Aztecs in a flower war that had turned into a real war during the battle. So they could get really, really bad. Now, I went into great detail to explain to you the concept of these flower wars, but how are they reflected in the game? Well, for starters, they are not called flower wars, they are called garland wars, but that's just the same thing. And it's the unique technology that the Aztecs can research in the Imperial Age. If you bring together the food and gold for it, all Aztec infantry units receive 4 additional attack points. This makes pikemen a little bit more useful, but they are still not particularly good as a counter to cavalry in the Imperial Age, just because this unit is mainly good against cavalry due to its bonus damage, and the Aztecs, they lack the halberdier upgrade. So they will always only do 22 bonus damage instead of the 32 that the halbs actually do. And the 4 extra damage from Garland Wars is more like a consolation, if anything else. Thankfully, there are units that benefit a bit more from this unique technology. And amongst these units, there is definitely the Eagle Warrior, who, after researching Garland Wars, are even deadlier than before, especially in raids. These Aztec elite fighters are also among the strongest in the game, as they can receive all infantry upgrades thanks to the Aztec tech tree. Researching the technology is basically always worthwhile if an infantry unit is part of your army composition, and with the Aztecs, this should be the rule rather than the exception, I believe. So here's a question for you. If you go all in Eagle Warriors, should you research Garland Wars first in the Imperial Age, or should you upgrade the Eagle Warriors to Elite Eagle Warriors first? I personally would always choose the Elite upgrade first and then research Garland Wars once you have researched all other upgrades, including the ones in the blacksmith. The Elite upgrade does not give the Warriors +4, but at least 2 additional attack points, which is still pretty good, but also additional HP and another pierce armor and additionally even more speed, which instantly makes them much more efficient and effective in combat against arbalests or for raids under enemy TCs or even castles, even if they have bracer. For now, let's go back to these civilization bonuses and stick with the warlike nature of the Aztecs. They seem to have had more warriors in their population than farmers or laborers, and I found a source that estimates that 60, even up to 70% of the population were warriors. No idea how that worked, but presumably babies were born and as soon as they could carry a spear and a shield, they were sent to the battlefield. On the other hand, I have found sources that say that young people were not allowed to participate in the Flower Wars, or that they were only allowed to fight against their peers. In Wars of Conquest, however, things could be different. This really makes you wonder how high their life expectancy was. Some sources also suggest that warriors were also recruited from the nobility in the Garland Wars, because fighting in the Garland Wars was much more prestigious and honorable than in Wars of Conquest. In any case, I have now gone a bit far to explain why the Aztecs can produce their units 15% faster in the game. In addition, since the infantry buff in April 2025, Eagle Warriors are produced 10 seconds faster than before in Feudal Age, meaning Eagle Warriors might just be viable again in the Feudal Age, especially with the Aztecs. Of course, this bonus also shows up in the most common playstyle, where you initiate the Eagle Warrior switch on the way to the Castle Age, and you can produce a lot more units as an Aztec than, for example, the Inca or the Maya, while waiting to reach the Castle Age. But that's just the Eagle Warriors. This bonus applies to every single military units that the Aztecs have. Their drosh is 15% faster to produce. And just as much as your late game composition, the the siege units or the warships if you should play for whatever reason a water map with the Aztecs. Producing units 15% faster not only means that you have more units on the field in the same time or faster than your opponent, but it also means that you can catch up to your opponent faster in a military sense if you decided to play a greedy style of play and not invest into military units from the get-go. It also means that you can defend against crossbowmen much more quickly if you, and this is something I have observed with a friend, not me, of course not. I would never get into a position like this, but if, your friend, not you, might have a mishap in feudal age and lose all his archers, and then you are on your way to the castle age and you weren't patient enough with your archers and you have to compensate. What I'm saying is the Aztecs are faster in compensating mistakes that your friend might have done. Again, I'm not speaking about personal experience, of course, but I've heard this happens to people. However, the increased production rate will particularly be noticeable for units that are usually created rather slowly. For example, siege weapons and eagle warriors. Of course, the bonus affects every unit, but an archer is created in 35 seconds, and the Aztec saves a good 5 seconds on that. The eagle warrior is created in 50 seconds and saves 8 seconds per unit. Don't get excited about monks though, because they are not considered a military unit and therefore not affected by this bonus. So if you're planning to monk siege rush someone, just be aware that your siege weapons may come out faster, 15% faster, and so will your pikemen should you choose to accompany your siege weapons with pikemen, which you probably should, but your monks won't. Then there's another civilization bonus concerning the Aztec monks. We have already explained the importance of religion for the Aztecs. Priests were therefore important in Aztec society and culture and enjoyed quite high reputation. High priests of particularly important temples were assigned to important gods, while other priests looked after the lesser gods. The Aztecs had no shortage of gods, believe me, and these gods were assigned to different areas of life. There were cultural gods, and the most famous of these was probably Quetzalcoatl. Fun fact, Quetzalcoatl was one of the guardian forces in Final Fantasy VIII, which is my favorite part of Final Fantasy. I know, it's not 7, don't judge me. And only then did I find out that the guardian force was named after an Aztec god. But enough of that. There were also gods of nature, gods of creation, gods of day and night, gods of excess, gods of trade, and of course, you could have guessed, gods of death and fertility. Over 50 gods can be assigned to this classification alone, which means not only was there a great demand for priests to look after the gods, but you can also imagine just how many sacrifices had to be made to ensure that none of these gods were corrupted or angry at them. According to one source, between 10,000 and almost 80,000 people were sacrificed as offerings for the Great Pyramid in 1487, which is the wonder of the Aztecs, by the way. And all of that happened within 4 days. Women who were mainly engaged in domestic activities could also become priestesses, just as they could become doctors and traders. And if I had the choice, however, I would definitely have preferred to stay at home because listen to what priests did to please the gods. Some priests, get this, had to provide their own blood to appease the gods, depending on how bloodthirsty these gods in question were. For example, blood had to be sacrificed so that the sun would not fall from the sky. But we're not talking about pricking their finger with a pin, as a few drops won't appease the god. The priests cut themselves, or the offerings, in the ear, the arms, tongues, calves, chest, and, just to complete this whole circle of cruelty. I mean, come on. Even if I'm happy about being sacrificed to a god, is that really necessary? Couldn't they just make do with, your artery, your arm, something that's less excruciating? I don't know. The Aztecs were one of a kind, that's for sure. But remember that if they did not have any offerings, the priests did this to themselves. But all of this because they feared that if they didn't do so, the sun would fall from the sky. I mean, you don't want that. You would be probably willing to do something to prevent that. And as long as you have the means to do so, you will probably do that. And if that means that you're gonna cut your junk off, then that's what's gonna happen. Other priests consumed the organs and flesh of human victims as part of rituals. I'm not even sure if this is worse or not. Although, according to various sources, this form of cannibalism was perhaps less common than historians initially thought. Don't forget that we are always talking about human sacrifices that were captured in the Garland Wars, for example, or by capturing them through conquest. However, these human sacrifices, they were not thrown into a cell. Quite the opposite. As sacrifices for the gods, they were treated with respect and honor. In fact, according to various traditions, it was also an honorable death to be sacrificed for the gods, even from the point of view of the sacrificed. This is where the name of the Flower War comes into play, as the victims died a flowery death. This story once again shows us the power of faith, because I would not call it a flowery death. If the cursed priest standing in front of me ripped my heart out of my chest while I was still alive and then, in the worst case scenario, even ate it. This is not made up. This apparently happened. Alright, enough of the cruelty, but the developers of Age of Empires 2 probably figured that this particularly protein-rich diet of the Aztecs had to make their monks stronger, which is why the Aztecs, or rather their monks, receive 5 additional health points for every upgrade researched in the monastery. A monk in Age of Empires 2, when it gets created out of the monastery, it has 30 health points. In the Castle Age, they can research 7 technologies, and in the Imperial Age 4 more. So that makes for 55 more health points to add on top of the 30, taking us up to 85 health points. But one of the technologies in the Castle Age is Sanctity, which gives monks an additional 15 health points, taking the Aztec monks up to a total of 100 health points, more than twice as much as normal monks with Sanctity have. Sanctity and Fervor are usually the first 2 upgrades you research for monks, especially if you want to collect relics early on, which is something you should always prioritize because, as the Aztecs, you will generate 33% more gold through every relic that you collect. And it's not just the Aztecs, but if you're playing a team game, all your teammates will also be affected by this team bonus. A relic generates 0.5 gold per second or 30 gold per minute for each relic that is garrisoned. An Aztec or his team member, on the other hand, they generate 40 gold per minute, which is quite the increase. In any case, Aztec monks with these 2, I'm gonna call them standard upgrades, so Sanctity and Fervor, they already have 55 health points and can therefore take quite a beating. The complete 100 health points, however, are enough to survive pretty much every shot from a siege weapon and thus significantly increase their probability of converting said siege weapons. Alright, we've talked about all the civilization bonuses and also about the unique technology from the Imperial Age, which leaves us with the unique technology from the Castle Age. This technology is called Atlatl, and it gives the Aztec skirmishers 1 more point of damage and an additional range. This makes them marginally better for their main use case, which is fighting enemy archers, but it has a much greater impact on how well they can defend themselves against other units. Especially in a potential trash war at the end of the game, the Aztecs can try to compensate for a few weaknesses. For example, the additional damage makes them more effective against enemy hussars than skirmishers from other civilizations. However, since they lack the final armor upgrade, I wouldn't want to rave about Aztec skirmishers too much, even with Atlatl. In general, the trash units of the Aztecs are their big weakness, since their scouts cost gold and therefore are not trash. They also cannot build helps, and their skirmishers only become good with, Atlatl, which is usually researched in the late game, after reaching Imperial or maybe post-Imp. Aztecs absolutely need to get gold, and the best way to defeat the Aztecs is to actually deny their gold income. But before we talk about their military strategies and what to do against them, what is Atlatl and why does it have this strange name? Well, an Atlatl was a spear thrower, an arm-length stick, with a handle at one end and a hook for hooking the spear at the other side. So the leverage of the long Atlatl, it enabled the thrower to hurl a light spear much further and faster than if they just had their hand alone. These spears, which mostly had sharp points made of obsidian, bone, or even hardened wood, they were dangerous weapons that are usually referred to as darts today. This tool was used all over the world, but over time it was replaced mainly anywhere else than the Aztec Empire by bows and arrows. Atlatls were prestigious weapons, so much so that in some portraits of gods, even the gods themselves were armed with them. So I think the effect of Atlatl in the game is amazingly well done. Someone equipped with an Atlatl could definitely throw further than a normal spear thrower, and the leverage also made the spear fly faster, which certainly allowed more damage to be dealt. Strictly speaking, there were no skirmishers in Aztec armies. Atlatls were a tool used by the normal infantry. The best Aztec warriors could join the elite troops of the army and became eagle warriors and jaguar warriors. Regardless of their rank, Aztec children learned how to use weapons, such as the Atlatl and other weapons, and practiced for war in special schools. Until the age of 14, the education of children was mainly in the hands of their parents. And after that, the state and the company that they have been assigned to were responsible for them. They regularly underwent certain examinations and had to participate in practice fights in the temples assigned to them to test their progress. At the same time, they received an education in both religion, politics, and history from priests. Only the best students, however, could rise to become jaguar or eagle warriors. To do so, they had to distinguish themselves on the battlefield through special deeds and capture enemy warriors for the ceremonial human sacrifices. According to some sources, the youths were only considered adults once they had taken their first prisoner, and after taking at least 4 prisoners, they could advance in the military and become either an eagle warrior or a jaguar warrior. Eagle and jaguar warriors were the only fighters in the Aztec military that could actually be called professional soldiers, full-time soldiers. This rank was highly respected in society and also offered ordinary people an opportunity to rise to the nobility or at least enjoy similar privileges. Eagle warriors usually fought with spears, atlatls, and daggers as well as slingshots, mainly with the aim of stunning their opponents so that they could capture them without killing them. I always wondered, if you were wearing a helmet like they do in the game, was that really good for battle? Could they even see? Wouldn't that disturb them while they were fighting? But it turns out they were really wearing eagle-like helmets, pretty much like we know from the game. The jaguar warriors had pretty much the same equipment, but instead of a dagger, they were probably armed with a club, which was enhanced with obsidian shards, and they did wear clothing made from jaguar fur in the belief that the animal's strength would be transferred to them. So now you can decide, would you rather be an eagle warrior or a jaguar warrior? In the April update of 2025, this was finally taken into account as the elite jaguar warrior's skin now shows him in a full bodysuit made of jaguar fur, which is pretty much the same as they are depicted on historically accurate, paintings of said jaguar warriors. Contrary to what seems to be the claim on Reddit, I've actually only found reliable sources that there was no real difference in rank between Eagle and Jaguar warriors. In the game, Eagle warriors are a regional unit that the Aztecs share with the Maya and the Incas, while Jaguar warriors are the Aztecs' unique unit. In truth, Eagle warriors were also just an Aztec unit. Their armor was actually rather light to better suit the warm climatic conditions and allow the warriors a lot of mobility. In heavy armor, you can imagine, it would also have been much more difficult to take and transport prisoners. In the game, on the other hand, Eagle warriors are primarily equipped with armor that has high pierce armor, making them particularly useful as a counter to ranged units or as a raiding unit. Their fast movement speed makes it easy for them to catch up with ranged soldiers in the game or quickly kill villagers in the enemy's economy. Personally, I also find Eagle warriors much easier to micro, at least much easier than other units in the game, and even managed to get some surrounds done with them generally easier than with other units. But that is just my personal feeling. Eagle warriors cost a lot of gold and a little food, which is why gold is the most important resource for the Aztecs. Instead of a scout, the Aztecs start with an Eagle scout, which is superior to a mounted scout in the Dark Age, but inferior to the mounted scout in the Feudal Age. Just like mounted scouts, additional Eagle scouts can only be produced from the Feudal Age onwards. Unlike the mounted scout, the Eagle Scout does not receive a hidden buff when it reaches the Feudal Age, as this is only given to it in the Castle Age. This is why Eagle Scouts are often disappointing in the Feudal Age, but once you reach the Castle Age, they have a power spike even without the Eagle Warrior upgrade and are strong against any Feudal Age army you can imagine. Jaguar Warriors were, until recently, an exclusive counter to infantry units due to their bonus damage they dealt. They are not as fast as Eagle Warriors, but still a little bit faster than normal infantry even after the latest update. Their bonus damage against infantry has now been halved, but what was lost has been added as normal damage, so they now do significantly more damage against all unit types. In addition, Jaguar Warriors have the special ability to take extra damage for each enemy military unit they defeated, up to a maximum of 4 extra damage. I don't know if this is just a glorious coincidence, or if this is aligned with the Lithuanian relic bonus, or if the developers did this on purpose, but I think it's really cool that this bonus can be explained by the fact that the Aztec warriors could earn the rank of Jaguar Warrior by capturing exactly 4 enemies, if the sources are correct. I'm going to go ahead and say I think it's really because of that. Well, since they only have 2 ranged armor without upgrades and are not as fast as Eagle Warriors, they are countered by ranged units. Nevertheless, the update in April 2025 has ensured that the Jaguar Warriors now have more use cases than before the update, especially because infantry has now become more popular. The Elite upgrade costs 1,000 food and 500 gold. It increases the health points by 10 up to 75, increases their attack by 4 up to 19, and the bonus damage against infantry also by 1 additional point, and gives them another melee armor. So, is this upgrade really worth it? I think researching Elite will remain the exception rather than the rule, and will probably mainly take place when the game is already going very well for yourself. It's still not advisable to go full Jaguar Warriors, I'd like to say. The opponent can play wonderful ranged units against you, and especially Scorpions with ballistics will just shred Jaguar Warriors if masked. Eagle Warriors still seem to me to be the much better unit. On the other hand, as an Aztec, you'll certainly have at least 1 castle sooner or later, because you absolutely need it for traps in the Imperial Age, and probably conscription to get units on the field faster, and later also for the unique techs, especially if you play on Eagles. And then it's not that difficult to create a few extra Jaguar Warriors and mix them into your army, regardless of whether they're made because they're strong or because they're just very stylish. Alright, that was a lot of numbers now, but there is one number I cannot withhold from you, and I know that you're all just waiting for me to say it. A fully upgraded elite Jaguar warrior, who also receives the 4 extra damage from killing or defeating 4 different military units, does a whopping 31 damage. 31. By comparison, a Lithuanian elite Latis with full upgrades and 4 relics does 22 damage. However, the elite Latis has significantly more life and it also rides a horse, so that's better, I guess. Alright, I think we've talked about the civilization bonuses, we've talked about both the unique tags, and we've also talked about the unique unit, which is the Jaguar warrior. Next, I would like to take a look at the military strengths of the Aztecs. Aztec army compositions are basically always based on infantry, mostly eagle warriors or pikemen, or maybe both. Although the Aztecs have a strong line of swordsmen, because of their eagle warriors, there is really only a reason to use them if they are not fighting against arbalists, and the opponent relies on infantry themselves to counter the eagle warriors. In addition, when fighting cavalry civilizations or after researching redemption to convert enemy siege units, it is almost always a good idea to fall back on the strong Aztec monks. Aztec ranged units are not particularly strong due to the lack of thumb ring and the last armor upgrade in the Imperial Age, but they are a useful addition to the eagle warriors if you can afford it at all. Due to the gold-heavy focus of the economy, it is relatively easy for Aztecs to switch to the ranged unit line at any point of the game. It is not uncommon to play with archers in the feudal age because they are created faster than the eagle warriors and they are probably also stronger, and most importantly, they are cheaper. However, at the latest stage of the game, past Imperial Age, you look for ways to initiate a tech switch towards eagle warriors if you haven't done that already. If your opponent plays crossbowmen, this can already make sense in the Castle Age. Just the way Aztec arbalists get worse at the end of the game, eagle warriors get all the better. Since Aztecs have no cavalry, they are vulnerable to raids by knights. Yes, I know, they have the Nahuatl warrior, so I will take this moment to briefly discuss the unit before we will forget about it forever. Aztecs can't build a stable, but they can convert enemy stables with their monks. Afterwards, they can actually create a unit there that is similar to a knight in terms of stats, base stats. And this unit is called the Nahuatl warrior. I hope it's called that way because I have no idea how to pronounce it. The problem is this. Aztecs cannot research cavalry defense upgrades in the blacksmith. So these warriors, these Nahuatl warriors, they will die to anything with Castle Age upgrades. Incidentally, the Nahuatl warrior is completely made up and was not an Aztec unit, but it was actually the Aztec god of lightning, death, and misfortune. This god was often depicted as a monster, for example, with twisted limbs and a dog's head. Nahuatl literally means monster in the Aztec language, sometimes also servant or fool. So you can take a guess why the developers decided to call this unit the Nahuatl warrior. This unit has only been available in the game since the definitive edition and can be created by the Aztecs, Maya, and the Inca, although the Maya cannot do this outside of the scenario editor as they cannot convert stables with their monks. Another exception is the Mega or Hyper Random map, where you can start with a stable by chance, and of course Battle Royale mode, which nobody plays, but where you can take a stable, and once you control it, you may create this said unit. I don't want to say any more about this unit though at this point, but if I ever do a trivia episode for, podcast supporters, I will tell you the rest. The starting point of this digression was my statement that the Aztecs are susceptible to raids by knights. However, since they don't want to use their arbalists for defense, I would imagine they would rather use them to kill enemy units and they would rather kill villagers. The Aztecs usually defend themselves against enemy raids with monks and pikemen, and in the late game with pikemen only if necessary, because they have no access to the help upgrade. So their overall trash options are rather poor. Pikemen can also be used to defend the trap push or generally support the arbalist mass. In this respect, arbalists with pikemen are a perfectly valid army composition. If you want to rely fully on infantry, you do have to be careful. Eagle warriors are countered hard by champions and still efficiently enough by knights. Also, since knights cost less gold, this is mainly a cost-efficient fight for the knights rather than the eagles, as eagle warriors are very expensive and gold-heavy. In this respect, it is always worthwhile against a cavalry player not only to support your army with monks and to get some conversions in, but as well to just mix in some pikemen, even though they are not that strong, just to, poke at your enemy and get that bonus damage in between your eagle warriors, which is your main army. The pikes benefit from the same upgrades as the eagle warriors and are therefore automatically strong. Thanks to their bonus damage, they can deal a lot of damage against mounted units, especially in the Castle Age, and thus deter enemy cavalry. You don't have to be afraid of arbalists either, as the eagle warriors will draw a lot of shots or the player would have to concentrate far too much on the micro. In short, against cavalry players, you can easily add a few pikemen to your eagle warrior army. As you can see, the Aztecs don't exactly shine with particularly versatile army compositions and are therefore relatively predictable. On the other hand, their monks and eagle warriors can turn games in no time at all, so their power spikes are largely centered around these two units and thus mainly around gold. So what are the usual strategies we see with the Aztecs? The good old drush is definitely a good way to open the game. In the past, Aztecs were known to open drushes with more than 3 militia, which they still can do effortlessly at the start of the game thanks to their extra gold. Nowadays, this is not done so much because the opponent would have archers on the field in time. However, this doesn't change the fact that the opening with a drush makes a lot of sense for the Aztecs. The follow-up from archers is made easier by the remaining gold and is very natural anyway. If you're feeling a bit reckless, you could also open with a drush and go for a somewhat risky follow-up with a fast castle. This is now a little easier on Arabia as the map is a little more closed again. Thanks to the additional gold and the eco bonus, it is very easy for the Aztecs to reach the Castle Age after a drush. The strategy does make a lot of sense with this civilization, especially because you don't need any eco bonus in the Castle Age to dare to attack. Monks and siege weapons don't need too many upgrades and can be used at once. And they also deal massive damage to the enemy, as well as quickly persuade an opponent who is exerting pressure on you to turn back. Eagle warriors do need to be upgraded, but are not expensive in terms of food, so you don't need that big of a boom, which makes a fast castle viable. Depending on the map, however, you should make sure that access to gold is secured also in the long term, otherwise this plan will quickly go down the drain. A bit old school, but now possibly modern again, thanks to the update, would be to open with men-at-arms instead of a drush. With their extra gold, Aztecs almost give you the men-at-arms upgrade for free when you have built 3 militia soldiers. This classic opening is therefore particularly easy with Aztecs and allows an easy transition into archers. I've also seen some pros experiment with Aztecs after the patch came out, turning 4 militiamen into men-at-arms or even 5, but that was probably just the typical first few weeks though. I don't think we will see that in the future. And, what's the point? Aztecs have great eagle warriors. Unlike the Maya, the Aztecs can use an aggressive opening with eagle warriors from 3 barracks relatively effectively, as their eagle warriors are created more quickly. The all-in can also start relatively early because you don't need as much food and gold can be mined quickly. The eco is therefore heavily geared towards gold, so you usually buy the Castle Age time with the market. However, This is an all-in strategy which has its effectiveness increased significantly in the Castle Age compared to the Feudal Age. This strategy is particularly suitable after a Drush into Archers opening in the Castle Age and can be prepared quite elegantly on the way to the Castle Age. The aim is then to literally overrun the opponent. The archers in the Feudal Age can be used to put the opponent under pressure and prevent them from walling if possible. A classic among the Aztec army compositions is the monk siege push, which is usually accompanied by pikemen to counter any light calves, which is played with 1 TC and aims to put pressure on the opponent as early as possible, especially to punish defensive or booming players. The monks are improved with as many technologies as possible to give them more health points, usually in this particular order: Sanctity for more health points, either Redemption or Atonement, depending on whether the opponent is defending with siege weapons or their own monks. Devotion should be researched the moment the opponent has researched Redemption or Atonement themselves. You might as well research further if you have the gold and the time for it, but that should be a low priority because these kind of pushes are usually played from a forward, not from your own base, so you don't need the monks to be that fast. Herbal medicine and especially heresy are usually only researched in the Imperial Age. Pikemen then protect your siege weapons and monks from being sniped by light cav. So these are some basic strategies, some basic openings you can do with the Aztecs, but what exactly is their role in team games? To be honest, Aztecs are quite out of place in team games and possibly one of the worst civilizations right now, as they can neither contribute cavalry nor particularly good arbalists, because they do lack the final armor upgrade and thumb ring and have no special bonus on them. Until the Imperial Age, they are still halfway suitable as a flank civilization, but later on, they pretty much suck. Only on close maps do they have a clear role. Thanks to their eco, they can boom well and play strong siege weapons with siege onagers, and, they can also add their very strong eagle warriors comparatively early on. Here, too, they are far from being the first choice for such strategies, I would think. After all, they lack any bonus on siege weapons, and not having bombard cannons is also not exactly thrilling to me. But at least they are not quite as useless as on open maps. In 1v1, it's a bit different. Aztecs are particularly good on maps that are either very open or as close as possible, but without a large distance to the opponent. On open maps such as Arabia, you will sooner or later use Eagle Warriors to gain map control with the only available mobile unit you have, prevent your opponent from spreading across the map and expanding, and above all, raid from many sides, as many as possible, to overwhelm your opponent. On maps like Gold Rush or Golden Swamp, where most of the gold is in one place, Aztecs are keen to seize control of the gold in time and hold it permanently, otherwise they won't be able to afford their expensive units and will be on a nasty timer. This mobility is not available on closed maps, but the Aztecs benefit from extremely strong monks and siege weapons. Aztecs are therefore played mostly aggressively on closed maps, I would imagine, often with the aforementioned monk siege pushes. On water maps, Aztecs do not really manage to play a convincing role. And this is pretty much true for hybrid maps as well, because their civilization bonuses do not help them in water at all. And Aztecs can neither research galleons nor cannon ships or dromods in the Imperial Age. They are also denied heavy demos, only fast fireships can be researched in the Imperial Age. So their fireships are their saving grace, which makes them at least playable on hybrid maps, which consist of smaller ponds or lakes where fireships are being played. Their main weakness is that they are basically countered by most other civilizations that are good on these kind of maps, because more likely than not, Aztecs will lose on water, which means that if you're doing a siege push or if you're doing some other stuff that is meta, the enemy will usually be victorious. Aztecs therefore don't have much to lose on hybrid maps, so it's better not to play the meta. but to think about something extraordinary. On water maps, for example, the Aztecs could expect to lose water sooner or later and just involve the opponent in as many disruptive conflicts as possible by landing on his island or at least, on his land and trying to do a forward. So this is the military overview. What is the legacy the Aztecs have left us? They belong to the second generation of civilizations and came along with the conquerors add-on. Almost 25 years ago, a quarter of a century ago, in the year 2000, and the Aztecs appeared together with the Mayans, Spanish, Huns, and Koreans. They have not lost their identity as an infantry civilization with ranged support, good siege weapons, and strong monks in all these years. However, many other civilizations have changed. Until the release of the definitive edition in 2019, the Aztecs were considered one of the best, if not the best, civilization in Arabia. I also remember this because before I got to know the pro scene, I never played the Aztecs, but through the pros I took a liking in the Aztecs and was able to defeat the AI on the hardest difficulty level for the very first time in my life, and that was done with the Aztecs. Today I laugh about that, of course, but back then it was unbeatable proof for me that the pros they knew what they were talking about. Apart from the fact that drushes and minute-arm openings were much more common back then, which played right into the Aztecs' hands, the fact that their bonus on the increased production speed of military unit was higher at 18% compared to today's 15% was decisive for their Aztecs' dominance. In fact, the Aztec were considered so strong that the bonus was initially reduced to 11% with the definitive edition and only later raised to 15% again with victors and vanquished. By then, however, the meta had changed so much that the Aztecs had lost their supremacy on Arabia, unprecedented in the balancing history of Age of Empires 2. In the years following the release of the definitive edition, Aztecs are almost no longer played in tournaments and are also considered one of the worst civilizations on Arabia. Just for comparison, in the Hidden Cup 1 tournament, they were chosen 8 times in 16 Arabia games. Otherwise, if they were not played, they were mostly banned and usually replaced by the Maya. Hidden Cup 5 took place in 2024, with more players, more maps, and even more matches played, and yet the Aztecs were only played twice in the whole tournament, not just on Arabia, twice. Once on Hidden Forts with a win by Viper against Yo, and once on Islands by Doubt against Viper, which Doubt lost. So how do we explain the downfall of the Aztecs? I have a hypothesis, and that is that the Aztecs are a wonderful illustration of the power creep in Age of Empires 2. The Aztecs are hardly any different today than they were in their heyday during the 2010s. However, many new civilizations have entered the game that are giving the Aztecs a run for their money. What the Aztecs had over all the civilization for a long time was their great monks. Without a doubt, they were the best monk civilization in the game. Currently, there are many civilizations that are at least as good but have better timing, like the Bengalis or the Burmese, or they have better economies like the Armenians, or even better military options like the Portuguese. I'm not saying these civs are have better monks. On paper, the Aztecs should still be at the top of the list, in my opinion, but in the overall package as a civilization as a whole in the current meta, the Aztecs are simply outdated. There are too many new or buffed civilizations that can effectively defend against the famous monk siege push from the Aztecs. Unlike the Bengali monks, for example, the Aztecs also have to invest a lot of gold in upgrades to have their strong monks, so it does take a while for them to be at full strength. And it's kind of similar for the Eagle Warriors, even though Eagle Warriors can be very strong and it's extremely hard to beat fully upgraded elite Eagle Warriors in the late game, especially if the Aztecs have enough gold to keep up the production, especially if they have Garland Wars. It's just become much harder for the Aztec to get to that point in the late game these days. So the meta is also part of my explanation, I believe. The Aztecs have bad trash units and they lack a raiding unit that doesn't cost gold. In the age of defensive playstyles and hussar meta in the late game, that's almost a death sentence for a civilization. The pros, just like us amateurs, I believe, have gotten much better at defending against aggressive playstyles, and a civilization as predictable as the Aztecs is naturally going to be deliberately disrupted from playing to its strengths by players who know how to do that. In addition, Jaguar warriors have been pretty useless so far, as nobody played infantry and therefore the Aztecs did not need a counter to infantry. And Eagle warriors are always the better alternative, or your own champions, if you will. Most balance changes, therefore, in the past have focused on the Jaguar warrior in the hope that the unit would be played more often, although the problem was more with the infantry unit type in general. Therefore, the April 2025 balance changes are the first real improvement for the Aztecs in a long time, even though it was actually not really for the Aztecs but for all infantry civilizations as a whole. But generally speaking, infantry has been buffed a bit, making obvious openings for the Aztecs a bit more attractive again. But still, the Jaguar warrior was always, for many years, the main focus of the balance changes, whereas the rest of the civilization has basically stayed the same, also due to the fact that they have been dominating for a very long time. But whether or not this infantry change is enough to make the civilization, become a top civilization in Arabia again, this is something that I still doubt.
Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, eagle warrior of Tenochtitlan. An omen appeared above the forest, the shape of an ear of corn, but blazing like daybreak. It seemed to bleed fire, drop by drop, like a wound in the sky. I am a warrior, not a priest, and knew not what to make of such a sign.
The Aztecs are one of the civilizations that have their own campaign. It is called Montezuma and consists of 6 scenarios in which you always play as the Aztecs. The campaign is set in the absolute heyday of the Aztecs, when they already ruled a large part of what is now Mexico and terrified the surrounding tribes and area. Almost 100 years are depicted, starting in 1428 and ending with the conquest of the empire by the Spanish under Hernan Cortez in 1521. The campaign is named after Montezuma II, who was already the ruler of the Aztecs when the Spanish arrived. Before the Spanish arrived, Montezuma had succeeded in significantly expanding the Aztec Empire through numerous conquests. The first scenario or mission in this campaign has no historical reference whatsoever, but is primarily intended to showcase the new terrain and architecture, as this mission was also playable in the demo version of the Conquerors. To complete the mission, all you have to do is place 4 relics in 4 different monasteries. The second mission showcases the Aztecs more from their warlike nature and tasks us with destroying 4 enemy town centers and then defeating former allies who turn against us. As the opponents mainly produce infantry units, you can play very well with Jaguar warriors. This is certainly intentional, I believe, so that the Aztecs' unique unit can come into its play and be shown in all its glory. This mission also has no real historical background. The only relevant fact for the campaign is that a former ally turned against the Aztecs, which was quite common back then. In addition, it becomes clear that the Aztec Empire, with its dominance in its region, had to fight rebellions again and again, which, as you know, was actually intended by the Aztecs in order to have a good excuse to take new prisoners. The third mission is based on the historical battles of Xantla in March 1519 and Nahuatl in October 1519, which took place between the natives and the Spanish. The Spanish have sought out regional allies against whom you, as an Aztec, must take action. You yourself also have an ally, but that ally is dangerously close to the enemy and must therefore be rescued or protected, for which there is even an achievement. Contrary to what is shown in the game, these were not the Aztecs in the first battle, nor even their allies. At the time, the Aztecs did not even know about the arrival of the Spanish. However, This changed shortly afterwards, and the second battle in this mission actually took place in Nahuatl against the Aztecs. This third mission is called Quetzalcoatl because for a long time there was a myth that the Aztecs thought the Spaniard Cortez was the god Quetzalcoatl himself, which is highly disputed by historians today. The fourth mission is about the Noche Triste, the sad night of June 30th, 1520, when the Spaniards had to flee the previously occupied capital Tenochtitlan. In order to complete this mission, the Spanish wonder must be destroyed within a time limit of 300 years. The map on which this mission takes place shows the capital Tenochtitlan as an island surrounded by the Lake Texcoco and the beautiful rainforest, and this is personally my highlight in the whole campaign. As a child, I still remember the feeling of experiencing real history, an experience that is heavily tainted in retrospect because with an adult eye and a bit of historical research, it becomes apparent that the game has clear limitations in both storytelling and historical accuracy. The fifth mission takes place during the Battle of Otumba on July 7th in 1520, shortly after the death of Montezuma. You start on 2 islands and pursue the Spanish fleet to the mainland in order to defeat them there. Cortez will surrender as soon as you destroy the Spanish town center. In reality, the battle went the other way. The Spanish surprised the Aztecs with a cavalry charge, defeated their commander, and drove the Aztecs' army apart, resulting in a clear landslide victory. Here, too, it becomes clear that the campaign is strikingly different from the historical events that actually took place. The last mission takes place on the same map as Mission 3, which was the capital, Tenochtitlan, on the island, because this time it's about the siege of Tenochtitlan. We are not attacking the capital, of course, but defending it against the Spanish and their allies. Above all, we are trying to protect the Aztec wonder from being destroyed by the Spanish. Our aim is to destroy the Spanish town centers once again. Although we emerge victorious in this battle, in reality, this battle marked the downfall of the Aztec Empire. And at this point, I do have to shake my head a little. Whenever I try to explain to parents or teachers as a child that you could actually learn something from video games, I always cited this Aztec campaign as an irrefutable example. At school, I even chose the Aztec Wars, the Garland Wars, or Flower Wars, as the elective topic in my middle school history lessons and quoted from the game's history book. Imagine that. Today, I look at the campaign and wonder how strange and fragmented the Aztec story is told. And that, dear listeners, is my overview of the Aztecs and their inspirations as a civilization in Age of Empires 2. There's a lot more to tell about the Aztecs as a civilization, but I'll save that for a trivia episode if I ever do choose to make one. To end this episode, I'd like to do some housekeeping. This podcast is free to listen to, but you can support it on Patreon. There, you can choose one of several tiers and show that you like my work. Please tell people that this podcast exists. This is relatively new since we've started to produce English instead of German podcasts. And I would be very, very much obliged if you spread the word so that everybody knows about this project. And please, if you do so, do it in a good light. Tell people about the good things and let them find out about the bad things on their own. As an incentive and kickoff to this new edition of the podcast, I also have a little surprise. The first 3 people to become a Patreon in the Castle Age or Imperial Age tier and support in this tier for 3 consecutive months will receive a 3D puzzle of a Korean turtle ship from me with worldwide shipping as a thank you for kicking off this podcast project. This 3D puzzle, by the way, is not made by me. I bought this when I was in Seoul in the National Museum just 2 months ago and thought, hey, maybe this might be a good welcoming gift to the very, very generous supporters on Patreon. If you are considering doing that, and after listening to this podcast, you go up to my Patreon page and you will not see this special gift being listed on the tiers for Castle or Imperial Age, that means there were already 3 people before you and you're late. I'm sorry about that, but still, if you choose to support me, then I am very grateful for that. Also, if you want, you can send feedback and comments about this podcast episode or any other episode just by writing me on Discord or an email, which you should direct to ageofcast@gmail.com. That is ageofcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to this episode about the Aztecs. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon.